In the game Marathon 2026 by Bungie, the game explores concepts of post-humanization in a spacefaring future. In the cinematic trailer, we meet Glitch and Void, two transhuman, post-biological people who live in shells that house their psyches. They are what we can call pseudo-immortal. Being post-biological, they cannot die since their consciousness is uploaded to their parent's server upon death. However, we call them pseudo-immortal since there is no biological function under the threat of death. Instead, there is only the echo of a humanity imprinted onto a machine that replicates a sense of human self and desire. Glitch and Void are remarkable because they represent two possible dispositions towards a post-human identity. Glitch mourns her increasing fragmentation and sense of self deteriorating as her original source consciousness, meaning she still identifies with the source she is based on, even if that experience is so distant from that self as to be lifetimes away. Void, contrarily, neither recognizes himself nor cares to. The human he was is irrelevant, likewise their relations, since none of these identities have any bearing on Void's present reality as a post-human. Thus, unlike Glitch, who mourns the self she is losing, Void is either completely numb or has long accepted his human identity as irrelevant to his current version of consciousness. However, it is implied that Void is not inhuman, merely that he does not identify with his source consciousness as a necessity of continuation between himself and the past. This is remarkable because Glitch defines her existence through a continual sense of self pervading from past into present and future, despite the fact she is dissociating from her source identity as it fragments over so many cycles of death and rebirth. Where Glitch laments her loss of identity, Void embraces it as a necessity that relieves him of the burden of believing he was ever human, unlike Glitch. Glitch believes she has source in her original biological identity as a human being, but this is collapsing under intense scrutiny because Glitch cannot comprehend that she is not her source consciousness continued. Rather, she is a replication of a replication. That is why her fragmenting of her identity over the course of so many recursive deaths and rebirths has lost her connection to source consciousness since she cannot recognize her original human source as herself, meaning continuity did not survive the fragmenting of Glitch's psyche over so many rebirths. But what about Void? Void seems to approach the problem differently, and this is visible by his complete disinterest in his original human identity or his relation to it. Void does not recognize nor identify with the original human he was based on, precisely for that reason. He is not the original person continued. He is a replication the original was imprinted onto that was then destroyed in Void's creation. This is why Void is entirely okay with accepting he does not recognize his human source, because no continuation occurred between the human and who would become Void. Glitch, however, is a machine exhibiting a sentimental attachment to a pre-transhuman identity that was destroyed to create herself. This is equally fascinating for the opposite reason. Where Void is perfectly content to dissociate and fragment his original source impressions of consciousness, Glitch is much more conflicted since she still values her original source humanity as the basis of her identity. Void does not base his identity on his human origin. Instead, he bases it entirely on his concept of self that has developed over time as a post-human. So, who is right? Let us examine the following. The presumption of transhumanism is that consciousness can be replicated in a machine. We are not arguing this is not true. We are instead arguing consciousness cannot be continued into a machine. We argue this because continuity of consciousness is not possible because it demands one of two outcomes. First, either the post-human identity wakes up, and so does the original biological source intelligence. In this case, the jump failed and the copy is just that, a copy, not a continuation. If both occupy consciousness, then the copy is not a continuation. Therefore, the second scenario is that the source consciousness destroys itself in the attempt to jump to digital architecture. Why do we say this? Because the copy is still a copy even if the original was destroyed to create it. Even if the source dies to prevent dual existences, there is still the problem that no continuation occurred, because even if the death of source happened, you cannot leap consciousness from biological architecture into digital ones without inherently destroying the thing you are trying to transhumanize. It isn't a continuity of consciousness to kill source and then replicate it digitally. This is instead creation of what we can call a digital doppelganger. It is an echo on which an identity is printed, not the original identity continued. Therefore, even if source is killed to prevent dual existences, it does not negate the absence of continuity. The argument for transhumanism then becomes it doesn't matter if consciousness continues so long as the new consciousness thinks it was the old. Again, this is not continuation, it is replication and supplanting of the original. Since no continuity takes place, the order to replace organic source to escape death into pseudo-immortality, i.e. a digital platform, collapses under the scrutiny that you cannot transhumanize a source consciousness without killing it, and that if you do not kill it and you awaken in your human body, then no jump occurred. The you who wakes up in the robot body is not you. It only thinks it's you. The reason is that an imprint of an identity of a human organic construct will fragment over time into a drift of source dissociation. Or more simply put, anything that comes out of transhumanist jumps from organic architecture to digital ones are killing themselves in the process, and if they aren't, then they're just duplications. Everything trying to leap into transhumanism will forever come to the barrier of what we could call the absolute limit of consciousness. What that means is that even if you perfectly replicated your conscious in a machine, you would not be experiencing it as your own life. It would be a parallel self-duplication. What this reveals to us is that whether or not the process kills the original is irrelevant to the truth that what comes out of the process of transhumanization is a replica, not a continuation. Because in either instance, if the host is not killed and wakes up in their still human body, what was the point of the jump? Likewise, if you must kill the source consciousness to avoid dual existences, then that problem betrays the truth. You must kill the original to prevent it from knowing the jump failed. The illusion of continuity collapses when a seamless transfer breaks down because the original cannot exceed the limit of its own biological death as demanded to avoid dual existences. So, because this is the absolute limit of consciousness, we can say that that limit is there to prevent any replication that demands the original die, since this is not continuity but instead birth or creation of an entirely new entity. The conceit of transhumanism is that consciousness is something we can recreate, like some material that is a standalone structure separable from its foundation. This is not true because consciousness is the aggregation of not only our thoughts and feelings, but also physical sensations and presence. It is embodied, rooted in every nodule of its components to summarize to more than its parts suggest. Any attempt to digitize or supplant consciousness through transhumanism is not transcendence, but instead critical collapse and the dissolution of humanity. We do not overcome death, nor is pseudo-immortality through digitization possible. Instead, all we realize is that the true finitude of our existence, there is no way to escape death by digitization. This makes us know that we are finite and that our temporary lives is precisely what gives them their value, because nothing is guaranteed. Thus, we can say that if Glitch and Void both paid to become post-humans with immortal lives, then the source consciousness was destroyed in the process of creating their new transhuman ones. In essence, neither Glitch nor Void are the person in the photographs, since neither are continuations of source humanity. Instead, Glitch and Void represent two different approaches post-humanity will take towards its own existence. Glitch holds on to a human sense of self she never truly possessed, but retains as an echo of the will of her original. Whereas Void abandoned any necessity to identify with his source humanity, since he is entirely okay with dissociating and fragmenting into an entirely new entity over time. Neither is correct insofar as neither can be wrong about their dispositions. Both are totally valid perspectives. Glitch cannot dispose of a humanity imprinted onto her, even if she herself is a replica that does not continue her original. She believes she does, which is the origin of her soul's reckoning with itself. Void, on the other hand, has dissociated from Source so much that even if he believes in a soul, he likely does not recognize his own as resembling his original human identity. Glitch, therefore, is a post-human machine unable to remedy her own humanity. Void is a post-human machine who remedied humanity by rejecting it entirely. Neither is right or wrong, since neither knows how to define self in the presence of the reality, neither is a continuation of the original. One laments and holds on, the other relinquishes and lets go. Neither is right or wrong, because no one is superior to the other for having that humanity that cannot reconcile with the absolute limit of pseudo-immortality. If one cannot die, is one truly alive?